Okay, please welcome Molly.
Welcome everybody, lovely to see a lot of familiar faces, which is really rather nice. That was beautiful to see you all here tonight. And thank you, Robin, for the opportunity to present tonight. Before we start, how many of you are understand astrology or got some understanding of astrology? So virtually everybody. Yeah, almost everybody. That's good. Okay, fine. So we're no. I mean, this isn't going to be that complex that hopefully it won't be that complex that people don't understand it. So yes. So thank you everyone for coming along tonight, and I want to start off by talking about January 2020.
Yes.
You may or may not remember that the eastern states of Australia were burning. We were on fire. And I hopped on a plane and went down to Melbourne for the biannual get-together of the astrologers. Every 2 years we would get together, about 200 of us, and we'd have a conference for about 4 days, and we'd have a wonderful time together. And we all knew that this was going to be the last one where we'd all be together face to face. Various things had happened, and we just knew that we had reached that turning point. We also all knew that 2020 was going to be a year like no other. And we obviously talked a bit about how it might manifest, what might happen, but really nobody fully knew. Not even the top astrologers in the world really knew. I remember reading, there was a very well-known astrologer, Roy Gillett, and he said, I have got no idea what is going to come, because the alignments of the planets were such that it was really difficult to predict. So that was really interesting. So I hopped on a plane afterwards, came back to Sydney, and off we went into 2020. So I wondered, have you ever wondered if we live in a random universe, or is there an order and a pattern to events on Earth unfold? And if so, what part does astrology play? Would you like to have a map to guide you through this web of change? Working with the planetary alignments and cycles, I aim to shed some light on how we came to be where we are and how we can move forward from here. So, first of all, I'm going to do what is astrology. Now I'll just give you this handout, which just gives you a little bit of rundown on the planets, just so that you've got this here. So that will help you. You girls probably know it anyway, but just grab one of those. The sheet I've given you just literally lists all the different planets that we would put into an astrology chart, from the Sun all the way out as far as Pluto. Okay, so there's 10 planets there we use. And each of those planets has a different cycle. Obviously the Sun has every 30 days it changes. The Moon has a 28-day cycle, all this sort of thing. But tonight we're going to have a look at the slower moving planets. And the ones I'm going to focus on are Pluto, Uranus and Saturn, because they're the ones that have really been making their mark on the world. And to begin with, what we're going to explore is how did we get to 2020? What led us into that particular time? Because we didn't just wake up in 2020 and go, oh, what's happening? There'd been a whole lot going on prior to that was pushing us in a certain direction. And to begin with, I want to have a look at the planet Pluto. And we'll talk a little bit about Pluto. One of you might want to read that, I'll talk about this anyway. Now, Pluto, whenever a planet is discovered, there's always events on Earth that reflect that particular element, that particular modality, that particular energy. And Pluto was, in fact, the planet that destroys and rebuilds. Transformation is the word we like to use. When Pluto transits a sign, we can guarantee everything associated with that sign will no longer be the same as it was before. It shows us the nature of the problems and the general type of solutions that will be required. It was discovered in 1930. Scientists observed a strange movement in the outer planets, and they figured there was something hidden out there. Pluto was very tiny, and yet its effect was enormous, just as it is natally or by transit. It heralded the beginning of expanded consciousness at a time when people like Freud and Jung introduced it to psychology, self-awareness, and the occult. This period also saw the production of the atomic bomb. With this came the realization that nuclear energy could be used positively as nuclear power in industry and homes, or negatively to destroy nations and the world. The length of time Pluto spends in a sign varies a lot, and I want to just show you how this works, because this is really what influences generations, okay? So if you can all see this, and don't be overwhelmed by all the colour. We're going to be focusing on this top line. Okay. Pluto has what we call an elliptical orb. Most planets have a fairly regular orb, like Uranus and Neptune. Uranus spends 7 to 8 years in a sign, Neptune spends 14 years. But Pluto averages 21 years in a sign, but it has what we call an elliptical orb. So what does that mean? Well, basically what it means is that it's going to spend longer in some signs than others. And when Pluto transits a sign, what it does is it digs up every single thing around that sign, as you will see when we look at Capricorn, and says, let's transform this, let's change it. We may need to do it differently. So if we look back, this is from 1900 to 2000. And if we look back here straight away, you can see that this is very wide and this is very narrow. Okay. So what we have here is that this is when Pluto was in Cancer. And this is all the people born between 1915 or so through to the end of the 30s. They've all got the planet in Pluto in Cancer. The next lot are the baby boomers who Pluto in Leo. And then we have Virgo and so on. And what you'll notice is as we get to here, which is Scorpio, Pluto runs very, very quickly through that sign. It spent nearly 30 years in Cancer, and only 11 years in Scorpio. Now, after that, it starts to, again, slow down. So in Sagittarius, it was a bit slower, and in Capricorn, which is where it is now, it's spending 16 years. So what does that mean? Well, basically what it means is that in our lifetime, we have seen a huge amount of change, and not only change, but very fast change. If we think back to, back here, that planet was in Cancer for all that length of time. So if people wanted to go through changes in their life, they had time to do it. The minute it hit Scorpio, which was 1984, for 11 years, everything went so boom, 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 boom. The changes are really coming fast. The other thing it means is that we have a lot of very different generations on the planet. Okay, if we think about these people who are probably in their 80s or so now, 80s, 90s, and then we go all the way through, of course, to the babies being born today. So how on earth do we deal with all these generations on the planet? If you go back to the 1800s, the late 1800s, when Pluto was in Taurus, it was in there for about 40 years, 30 years. And people didn't live very long. So there wasn't that same amount of profound change as we see happening in the world now. So this is what we're looking at here when we talk about some of the ramifications of this. Please ask questions if you don't understand what I'm saying. Okay, so that's the speed of Pluto. Now, let's take that one away. So let's talk about the story of how we got to where we are. And the story of our global evolutionary started in 2008. Remember the GFC? You might remember that. It started when transformer Pluto entered Capricorn in 2008 for the first time in 250 years, to bring about a massive regeneration of models and systems that run our world. And we experienced the first global financial meltdown. And interesting, at the time, I had an astrology group, which Charmaine was one of them. And we did a little thing, and when Pluto was going to go into Capricorn in 2008, I said, come on, let's decide what issues we think might come up. And this is what we wrote. Finances, super, and financial crisis. old people alone in homes and community, awareness of aging, especially older women, growing vegetables to market, authenticity and accountability. In the corporate, world leaders emerging, instant everything being challenged, take your time. Recycling, workplace issues and changes, internet versus face-to-face, get real. The environment and climate change, China and Australia, and real estate building. I think we were pretty spot on. We got just about everything that we possibly could get. So we can see that this is the image that we have of Capricorn, and we're going to be looking at this in more detail. And Capricorn, of course, is our most ambitious sign of the zodiac. So that was the Pluto energy. Now we're going to have a look at the Uranus energy. So let's take that away for a minute, make it easier for you. Because these are the two planets that have been stirring us up over the last few years. As Uranus moves through a sign, we think of the urge for freedom, the desire to break out from whatever the sign represents. It's how we want to uniquely express ourselves and be different. Uranus, as the higher octave of Mercury, urges us to think and communicate on a higher level, linking it to our intuition. Uranus was discovered in 1784 when the world was in revolution. It was the time of the French Revolution and the American War of Independence. And most importantly, it was the time of the Industrial Revolution, which transformed the way people worked. Machinery was introduced, and people who had been working at home now went out to work for the first time, bringing a sense of freedom and independence. Now, in 2011, Uranus moved into Aries, and it was there for the next 7 years. And Uranus in Aries, if we look at Aries is a very fiery sign. It's the first sign of the zodiac. It wants to get things done. It wants to bring through new things. It's impatient. It says, for goodness sake, let's get on with it. Very independent, very free-spirited. So this is what we see with and very childlike. There's that real youthful energy that we see with Uranus. Now, just as Uranus moved into Aries, of course, it came up against Pluto in Capricorn. And these two don't really like each other very much. Probably an understatement, actually. So we had these two going hell for leather with each other from 2011 to 2019. And this is what led us to 2020. We have to think about what was going on, what was happening, and also what was happening in your own personal life during that time. Because a lot of people, particularly anyone who's a cardinal sign, the Aries, Libras, Capricorns and Cancers, certainly have gone through major change during the course of this particular time. Pluto is the dark side of what has wounded you, and Uranus shines the light and offers a breakthrough in new ways. So the issues that came up during this time, we had the Arab Spring, the rebellion in Syria, we had the birth of the Occupy Wall Street movement, Bernie Sanders, the European and US debt crisis, we have Brexit and Trump. So a lot of very different, unusual things happening. The struggle between the old established ways and the new young ways. Now this is really critical because this is really older, the older people and the old ways, and this is young people and the young ways. We saw that in some of the rebellions that were taking place throughout the world. The West is the elderly and the East are the young. Refugee crisis with Europe and homelessness, domestic violence, the Me Too movement, equality, women's rights, gay liberation, and civil rights and the Black Lives Matter. All of these things go back to the 60s when we had these planets sitting conjunct one another in the sign of Virgo. So we are revisiting, and there's a whole cycle that continues back in history, further back to the 1900s and further back. And each one builds on the previous one. So if we think back to sort of, the 60s and all the things that were going on then, we're now building on what we learned and what happened from that particular time. Okay, now we have Uranus sitting in Taurus. Let's have a look at that one. this too is an earth sign. So we've now got 2 earth signs, which is a little bit quieter at some level, hopefully. Uranus moved into Taurus in the middle of 2018, and it's there till July 2025. And it's for the first time in 84 years. The last time it was there was in 1934. And Taurus is a very fixed sign, okay? It's a fixed earth sign, it's very practical, it's down to earth, security matters. And here we have Uranus sitting here going, well, let's shake that lot up, okay? And which is exactly what we've been feeling. So it's time for a new earth, a revolutionary change, bringing technology into these areas, the freedom urge, and the urge to change the economic and material world. Taurian associations arise from the core principles of values. So what's been really important is looking at our own value system over the last few years. What is really important to us? What do we really need in our world? What material things do we need? Also, we've had our earning capacity, our ability to work. Uranus has certainly shaken that up well and truly, how we work and how we do it, and brought in a lot more technology too, which is the Uranus energy. Our nature and our earth, of course, is very strongly part of this. The land, the resources, crops, food, cattle, everyone's got into gardening, everyone's got a dog. So all these animals have certainly surfaced during this time. Survival issues and establishing foundations. Learning to use our resources effectively. Moving away and back to nature. Think of the number of people that have left the city and gone back to nature. And are now growing their own food and doing all that sort of stuff. Our IT revolution brings the end of old industries and jobs, as it also gives birth to lots of new ones. Also, Taurus has a lot to do with pleasure, as we can see here. Bringing through beauty, art. How many artists were created during lockdown? Many, many artists, I think. Music got us through a lot of that time. And of course, food. The food got us through this period. And unfortunately, a lot of us put on weight, and we have the COVID curves and the Zoom bum. So that's what we've ended up with coming out of that. Now let's have a look at where we are in 2020. So this is what's kind of led us to it. Now in 2020, we've still got these ones here. Okay, we're going to bring Saturn into the mix. So in 2020, we had Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter all in Capricorn, which is why all the astrologers went, "Ugh, what's this going to be about?" It's a real overdose. And then we had Taurus, Uranus and Taurus. So there's a lot of Earth here, a lot of Earth. Jupiter in Capricorn, time for a new global philosophy. When Saturn joins Pluto exactly in Capricorn in January 2020, for the first time since 1518, the stage is set for the next major renaissance in human affairs. Then in December 2019, Jupiter joins them for the first time since 1284. And before that, 3,833 BCE. Yes, 5,000 years ago. In a nutshell, we have not experienced this level of epoch-changing time since 1284, when the financial systems and English parliamentary systems of the medieval world were born. Yes, get set for the birth of a brand new system from 2020. So, and also there were a couple of other cycles that were coming to an end then too. One that began in 1982 and one that began in 20 years ago. And when this happens, it's kind of like all these things synchronized together. It's like, you know, as a cycle comes to an end, obviously there's going to be a new beginning. And that's what we're that's what we're experiencing as we go into 2020. So Saturn is sitting here too now, to come to join this collection here. And Saturn sits in Capricorn, and that's its own sign. It's very comfortable there. So it's very realistic, practical, and says take responsibility. It's saying you've had the revolution, now do something about it. So that's what we're looking at here. It's like, get on with it, make some changes. Overconsumption has to change. The global crisis is due almost entirely to overconsumption, with the rich countries through exploitation of the poorer ones. Governments around the world are in disillusionment of current policies and leaders. Saturn in Capricorn plus Uranus in Taurus brings us right back down to earth, literally down to earth, and revitalises our current structures and frees up the areas of our lives that may feel stuck or that have outlived their usefulness. It's about taking responsibility for getting on with our own solutions as like-minded groups rather than waiting for our governments to act on our behalf. So it's a very huge, big wake-up call. And during 2020, of course, it began with COVID arriving. Now, there's an interesting cycle with COVID because it goes actually in a cycle back to the Spanish flu. Chiron, which is the planet we associate with wounds and healing, has a 50-year cycle, so 250s takes us back 100 years to 1918 when the Spanish flu hit. And that lasted about 3 years, so we're hopeful that the same thing will apply this time round. So during 2020, let's see what some of the things that we had to deal with and how much they related to this energy. We have massive control, caution and fear, world government. Who ran the world? The World Health Organization, and a target. Lockdowns, restrictions, do as you're told or you'll be punished. International and interstate borders were closed. State leaders and health professionals ran the country. We had to simplify our lives. There was no fun. Work changes, we worked from home, the ageing population and aged care. We could only travel 5Ks from home. We reconnected with nature. We began to walk and cycle and garden and do all the sorts of things where we got ourselves back into nature itself. Shops were closed, so we conserved our money. We had time on our hands, so we had to look at how do we spend our time. Father time here very much deals with that. How do we spend our time? We couldn't see family and friends. People were isolated. We wore masks and we socially distanced. So it was a pretty Saturn, Pluto and Capricorn time. It was a real time of, God, is this ever going to end? And then along came 2021, and we decided we'd start stirring things up a little bit as we got into 2021. And what happened here is that let's have this away for a moment. Saturn moved into Aquarius, which is a fixed air sign, and came straight away up against Uranus in Taurus, which is a fixed earth sign. So this was the next battle that took place, and this is last year, exactly, absolutely. And being fixed signs, neither was going to give way. So this is control versus freedom. Saturn tries to stop disruptive change to control the movement of the future. It maintains what has worked in the past and swallows the new. Uranus, on the other hand, prefers a complete upheaval of the status quo and rarely agrees with Saturn on the direction of the change. Uranus takes joy in the shaking up, the shattering, in the sudden shifts in ideas and movements. Uranus is strongly individualistic and can be revolutionary, absolutely, and even tyrannical. So how do we accommodate the new without being overly bound to the rules? It signals a time when the old system may no longer suffice, and your creative ingenuity is called forth to envision a new kind of future. It's the need to dismantle and demolish outmoded ways, to rebuild a new and inventive world. Accountability, where can you change and where won't you? It's very much that energy of Saturn says, I've always done it this way, it's tradition, I ain't changing, and Uranus goes, stop that, let's move it, let's change it. So we see this real constant battle, and everybody's going to discover in their own lives that there are some things you won't give up. So you've got to adapt it. But there are other things you're prepared to change, prepared to move. So this is the battle we had last year, and we are still experiencing it. It is not completely over yet, so we're certainly still experiencing it. It's about really being true to ourselves now and reconstructing in a different way, building on rock and not on the sand. Saturn and Uranus conjuncted one another last in 1988, which was just before we had massive changes in the world in 1989, okay? One of which was the structural collapse of the old Eastern Bloc, which is interesting that we've got the Russian scenario at the moment, and the exponential rise of new technology began. And I'd like to just read a paragraph that was written by Edgar Winter, who's a very well-known astrologer, that he wrote back in February 2021. I thought I would take the opportunity to show you the irrevocable change will surely happen, must happen, and with Uranus it means to expect the unexpected. February is the first clash of these titans, then June and finally December 2021. It's not till March 2023 that we're clear of the crossing over the bridge of dictatorial insanity. We are in the same period of Uranus back in its cycle of 84 years ago, and the energies around us now are like 1930 to 1940 and the outbreak of World War II. I hear also from my clients that friendships are changing. Some who are friends for years or even close family members suddenly and unexpectedly take strong sides against each other. I think we've all experienced this over the personality of Trump, the need to be vaccinated or not, or the dictatorial spin of the Victorian Premier Dan Andrews. The thing about the 1930s and the similar energies now was the build-up of fear. So Hitler was able to mass hypnotise most of the population by the blame game and fear speeches. And fear is our enemy. So pay attention to that one. The stars indicate that this month, February, with the first clash of the planets Saturn and Uranus, we have the first glimmers of society awakening to the false news flags in the media. The awakening caused an apology from the Facebook executive for cutting off critical news sharing. So this was the beginning of last year, and this is really what was the theme for last year. So we felt last year like we were living on eggshells. What will happen next? Lockdown, release, where are we going? What's going to happen? People leaving the city, and people in the city moving to the coast. Schools going online, we were working from home and then we were back to work. Get the jab, vax versus non-vax, rallies and protests, and families and friendships changing. So last year was far more disruptive than we saw in 2020. 2020 was a much more placid year. 2021, things really started to stir up. And that really has continued into the beginning of 2022. It's really only now that we're starting to finally get away from that. Finally, Saturn is moving ahead of Uranus, and so they're not fighting one another. They will come back together for a brief period in October, and then they will start to move away and on their journey. So most astrologers felt that by the end of April, beginning of May, things will ease, and that's exactly what we're experiencing. We've just had a major eclipse on Sunday, which included Uranus in Taurus, so it's really time for everybody to wake up and to start to try out new things. And also Jupiter will move into Aries in about, on the 10th of May, I think it is, and that will really get us moving. You know, it'll really get us fired up and get us going and get things happening. So grab the energy, get out there and do things and make things happen. And then in 2023, Jupiter will be in Aries, and Pluto will move into Aquarius in March for the first time. It will go back and forth from Capricorn. The way the planets move is they move forward and then they come back, do what we call retrograde, and then they go forward again. So by 2025, we will have Pluto in Aquarius, we will have Neptune will be into Aries by then, and Uranus will be in Gemini. So we'll have a very different alignment of planets and very different energies. That's more air and fire, okay, rather than the earth and the water that we've had. So as this year emerged, and as I started my story, yes, the astrologers are gathering again this year in June. They're gathering down in Adelaide, somewhere we haven't been for a very long time, so that's different. And there's only going to be 50 people there. The rest of the people will be on Zoom and online. So we too have adjusted our world to to take in a new way of operating and a new way of being. So that's where we're at the moment.
Mhm.